He walked into the interview room like he owned it, shoulders back, perfect tie and high chin. He shook hands with the panel, already picturing the job in his pocket. That's who he was, always certain the world bent in his favor. But then, his eyes landed on me. The smile vanished, his jaw clenched. His face was drained of color, because sitting at the head of the table, the one person he never expected to see in power was me, his new boss, his little sister, the same girl he had mocked for years, saying, "You'll never achieve anything. You're just a girl." And in that moment, I saw the first crack in his perfect confidence, the fear he could never hide from me. But to understand why that moment mattered, you need to see what came before. Before we continue, make sure to hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It wasn't in some grand hall or during a big fight. It started in the kitchen. A regular morning, sunlight spilling across the table, and him, leaning back in his chair with a smirk, tossing those words at me like knives. Words he thought I'd forget. "You're a girl." The words repeated in my mind like a cruel song, as if being a girl meant weakness, as if being a girl meant limitations. He had no idea that being underestimated was the greatest fuel for a fire. I wanted to argue right then and there. I wanted to throw my mug against the wall and scream that I was more than he could ever imagine. But I didn't need to. Instead, I smiled, small and quiet, as if his words meant nothing. And that smile, it wasn't defeat. It was a strategy. Because at that moment I decided I would let him believe he'd won. I would let him think I was weak. Because when the day came, and oh, it would come, my revenge would be so sharp, so shocking, that it would slice through his pride like glass. I excused myself, pretending I had work to do, but really, I just needed to breathe. My hands trembled as I held my phone, not from sadness, but from the surge of determination rushing through me. He thought he had crushed me. He thought his words had shut the door on my dreams. But what he didn't know was that he had just opened another one, a bigger one that led to the very plan that would one day bring him to his knees. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying his smirk, his arrogance, his absolute certainty that my gender defined my limits. Every replay hardened me. Every replay whispered the same truth. Prove him wrong. And while he slept peacefully, wrapped in the comfort of his ego, I began my silent war. I started making lists, courses to take, skills to sharpen, opportunities to chase. I began reaching out to mentors, reading late into the night, sketching plans for a future where his laughter would choke in his throat. I didn't tell anyone, not our parents, not my friends, not even a diary. This wasn't for sympathy. This was for victory. And here's the twisted part. Every time he mocked me after that day, it only made my resolve harder. He'd laugh at me struggling with work. I'd add another hour of practice. He'd dismiss my ideas at dinner. I'd secretly draft 3 new ones. He'd brag about his achievements. I'd make a silent promise to outshine them, not by a little, but by miles. He thought I was silent, because I was weak. But silence can be dangerous. Silence is where strategies are born. Silence is where battles are planned. Months later, when people began whispering about me behind his back, about my sudden growth, my promotions, my recognition, I stayed silent still, because I wasn't ready to show my hand yet. Not until the day it would hurt the most. That morning in the kitchen with his cruel smirk and careless words, he thought he had defined me. What he didn't realize was that he had redefined himself too, not as my protector, not as my brother, but as the first obstacle I would destroy. And when the day came, when he walked into that interview room and saw me sitting at the head of the table as his new boss, he would finally understand. The quiet girl he mocked had been sharpening her silence into a weapon, and his own words had been the whetstone. While my brother wasted his time bragging, I was working. He spent nights out with friends, laughing loudly, filling social media with empty pictures of himself holding drinks, flashing watches he couldn't afford, pretending he was already successful. But I was awake in the silence of my room, blue light from my laptop burning my tired eyes. I wasn't scrolling. I was studying. I wasn't wasting hours. I was investing them. Late nights, early mornings, endless courses, training, projects. That became my life. While he partied, I learned. While he mocked me, I planned. While he slept, I built a version of myself he would never see coming. And here's the part that makes it sting. He thought my silence meant defeat. He thought I didn't argue back because I agreed with him. But the truth was, I didn't need to defend myself with words. I was preparing to defend myself with results. Every insult, every smirk, every careless laugh he threw at me, those were my alarms. They pushed me to wake up earlier, to push harder, to climb higher. Slowly things began to change. My work started to get noticed. First it was a small recognition, an email from my manager praising me for solving a problem no one else could. Then came a promotion. Then came invitations to meetings I had once only dreamed of sitting in. I didn't tell him any of it. That was part of the plan. Because what is revenge without surprise? He kept bragging at family dinners. I'll be the first to buy a big car. I'll be the first to get a top job. She'll just watch. And I did watch. I watched him dig his own grave with arrogance. I watched him waste chances, skip deadlines, laugh at responsibilities. And while he told the world he was destined for greatness, I was already walking into boardrooms, shaking hands with directors, and being quietly offered something bigger than he could imagine. One of the biggest companies in the city saw me. They trusted me. They wanted me to lead. And here's the twisted beauty of it all. This wasn't just any company. This was the same company my brother had been chasing for months. He didn't know. He had no idea that the very seat he dreamed of sitting in was already mine. The day he got the interview email, he practically exploded with pride. He rushed into the kitchen, waving his phone around like it was a golden ticket. "Biggest company in the city?" he said. "I'll crush the competition. They won't know what hit them." I smiled. That same quiet smile I had given him months ago. The one that hid storms behind it. Because what he didn't know was that I was the competition. And this time, I wasn't just competing. I was the finish line he would never cross. Every day that followed, he kept bragging. He practiced answers in front of the mirror, boasting about how easy the panel would find him to impress. He wore his best suit 3 times in a week, showing off to anyone who would look. He imagined himself walking into that company, head high, shaking hands, already acting like a leader. But he never imagined this, that the very leader he would face, the one with the power to approve or reject him, the one who would sit at the head of that table, wasn't a stranger. It was me. That was the twist I had been building. That was the moment every late night, every early morning, every tear of exhaustion had been leading to. And the closer the interview day came, the more delicious the secret felt. He mocked me still. "Don't get jealous when I start earning more," he said one evening, laughing like he was already rich. I laughed too, not because I believed him, but because I already knew how the story would end. He thought he was walking into his victory, but really, he was walking into my trap. What he didn't realize was that his words had built me. His mockery had shaped me. And while he wasted his time showing off, I was building an empire. The day he finally stepped into that interview room, expecting to impress, he would see me sitting there. Not as his sister, not as the quiet girl he dismissed, but as the boss he would have to bow to. And when that moment came, it wouldn't just be a shock. It would be the sweetest revenge of my life. Because for once, he would understand what I had known all along. Being a girl was never a weakness. It was my power. The morning came, and the air in our house felt different. My brother walked around like a king about to claim his throne. He had put on his best suit, one he had borrowed money to buy, still carrying the price tag in its pocket. He stood in front of the mirror, repeating answers to imaginary questions, grinning at his own reflection. "Today," he announced proudly at the breakfast table, "our family name will rise." Our parents clapped for him, their faces glowing with pride. They believed his words, the way they always did. He soaked it up like a sponge, like he was already chosen. And me? I sat quietly, sipping my coffee. My heart wasn't racing with nerves. It was racing with anticipation. I knew something he didn't, something that would turn his confidence into dust in a matter of hours. He thought this was the biggest day of his life. He didn't know it was about to become mine. At the office, the building itself seemed to feed his ego. Tall glass walls, marble floors, and men in suits rushing down the halls. It was exactly the world he dreamed of. He walked in with a swagger, shaking hands with the receptionist, making small jokes to impress the staff. "I'll own this place one day." I overheard him whisper to someone as he was escorted into the interview room. The arrogance almost made me laugh. Almost. Inside the interview panel, he played his part perfectly, or so he thought. He answered questions with the same loud confidence he practiced at home. He bragged about his skills, half of which I knew were borrowed lines from YouTube videos. He smiled too wide, leaned too far, acted as though he had already been given the job. The panel listened, nodding politely, jotting notes. He mistook their politeness for admiration. In his mind, the room belonged to him. And then came the moment. The door opened. The sound of my heels against the floor echoed like a drumbeat. The room went still, the energy shifted, and every head turned toward me. I stepped in, calm, composed, carrying a silence that demanded respect. And then I walked to the head of the table, the chair no one else touched, the chair that belonged only to the leader. I sat down, and I watched my brother's entire world collapse in front of me. At first he blinked once, twice. He thought maybe his eyes were lying. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The color drained from his face. His practiced smile fell apart, and for the first time in years, he was silent, because his new boss was me. I could almost hear his thoughts racing. The sister he mocked, the girl he laughed at, the one he said would never achieve anything, was sitting at the head of his dream. I let the silence stretch. I wanted him to feel every second of it, the weight of his own words pressing down on him like chains. Finally I spoke, calm, steady, powerful. "Let's begin." The panel leaned forward, waiting for my lead. My brother sat frozen, his eyes darting between me and the others, like he was trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake from. I asked the first question, not cruel, not kind, just professional. He stumbled through his answer. All that confidence he carried into the room had vanished. His voice shook, his hands trembled, and every word he spoke was weaker than the last. The more he failed, the clearer it became. This was my stage now. And here's the part that twisted the knife. I didn't humiliate him. I didn't laugh or mock or remind him of the past. I treated him exactly as I would treat any candidate. Fair, professional, neutral. Because that was worse. If I had mocked him, he could have called it revenge. But treating him like just another applicant, someone who wasn't special, someone who wasn't chosen, that broke him in a way words never could. By the end of the interview, he couldn't even look at me. His once perfect suit looked heavy on him, like armor that no longer fit. He left the room quietly, his shoes dragging against the floor. And as I watched him walk out, shoulders slumped, head down, I felt a calm I had never felt before. This wasn't about destroying him. It was about showing him the truth, that the girl he underestimated had built herself into something stronger than his arrogance could ever reach. That day, the tables turned forever. He had walked into the room expecting to be celebrated. Instead, he left knowing the person he doubted most was now the one he had to answer to. And the irony? He always said I couldn't do anything because I was a girl. Now, because I was a girl, I was his boss. I looked straight at him and smiled. "Welcome. Please have a seat," I said, my voice steady and calm. He sat down slowly, almost like the chair itself weighed him down. Just minutes ago, he had walked in with so much pride, his chest out, his steps confident. But now, his hands fidgeted, his tie felt too tight, and the sweat on his forehead betrayed every ounce of fear he was trying to hide. For the first time, my brother was powerless, and for the first time, I held the power. I started the interview like any other, professional, fair, neutral, but to him, every word I spoke felt like thunder. Every question I asked wasn't just about work. It was a reminder of every moment he had mocked me. "Tell us about a time you faced a real challenge," I asked, leaning slightly forward. His mouth opened, then closed. He stuttered, trying to string words together, but nothing made sense. The same brother who once laughed at me for being too soft now couldn't even form a sentence in front of me. The other panel members noticed. They whispered, exchanged glances, scribbled notes. He wasn't the shining star he bragged about being at home. He wasn't the golden boy he pretended to be. He was just another nervous candidate. And yet, this wasn't just another candidate. This was him. The boy who told me I'd never achieve anything. The one who said my place was in the shadows while he would shine. Now, under the bright lights of the interview room, the shadows swallowed him whole. I asked the next question. His voice cracked. I could see his hands trembling against the table. Every answer came out awkward, broken, unsure. His confidence had drained away, leaving behind only silence and shame. And I didn't have to say a cruel word. That was the twist. I didn't humiliate him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't remind him of his past insults. I treated him like any other applicant, fair, direct, and professional. But that hurt him more than anything else. Because if I had mocked him, he could have blamed me. He could have said I was being unfair, but treating him like a stranger, like just another candidate. That stripped him of the illusion he had built for himself. The panel began to lose interest in him. One man even sighed, bored, as my brother stumbled through another weak answer. The woman at the end of the table shook her head slowly, already writing him off. I could feel his pride breaking apart piece by piece. At home, he was the loudest voice in the room. Here, he was nothing but a whisper. When the interview ended, he stood up too quickly, knocking his chair back. His face was pale, his tie crooked, and his once perfect posture had collapsed into defeat. He avoided my eyes, but I didn't look away. "Thank you for your time," I said politely, just like I would to anyone else. He muttered something that sounded like thanks, and walked out of the room, his footsteps heavy, dragging. Nothing like the confident strides he had practiced in the mirror. And in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice. Every late night I had worked, every tear I had cried, every insult I had swallowed, it had all led here, to this one scene, to this one shift of power where the roles had reversed completely. The boy who believed he was destined to lead had just been humbled by the girl he thought would never rise. And the best part? He had done it to himself. His arrogance, his laziness, his endless mocking. They had all built this moment. I had simply stepped into the role I had earned. That night I went home and sat by my window with a cup of tea. I replayed the look on his face when he first saw me at the head of the table. Shock, fear, disbelief, and underneath it all, a crack in his ego that would never heal. For years, he had tried to silence me, but in that interview room it was his silence that filled the air, and as I looked out at the city lights, I whispered to myself, not in anger, not in cruelty, but in calm truth. You said I couldn't do anything because I was a girl, and today I showed you being a girl is exactly why I could do everything. The twist of fate wasn't just that I had become his boss. The real twist was that his mockery had created the very strength that destroyed him. When the interview ended, my brother forced a smile. His lips stretched, But his eyes betrayed him. He tried to stand tall, straighten his tie, and act like nothing had happened. But everyone in that room had seen it. They had witnessed the moment his confidence cracked. The man who had walked in like a king left looking like a servant. The brother who mocked me for being just a girl had fallen apart the instant he realized his sister now held the power. Later that day, the whispers began. Offices are like small towns. Secrets don't survive for long. By lunchtime, everyone knew. By evening, it was the story of the week. People whispered in hallways, chuckled near the water cooler, shared smirks during meetings. The irony was too delicious for them to ignore. The same man who always claimed women couldn't lead was now being led by his sister. And it wasn't just office gossip. It was everywhere. Someone joked about it in the parking lot. Someone else repeated the story at a cafe across the street. People love a twist, and this one spread like fire. I didn't gloat. I didn't mock him. I didn't need to, because silence sometimes is the loudest revenge. The more I stayed calm, the more uncomfortable he became. Every time I passed him in the hallway, his shoulders sank a little lower. Every time he caught me speaking to senior executives, his eyes flickered with shame. Every time my name was praised in a meeting, he swallowed hard, pretending not to hear. It was public payback, but I didn't lift a finger. He had built this moment with his own arrogance. He had written this script with his own words. All I had to do was let the world watch it play out. One afternoon, during a team presentation, he tried to speak up. His voice cracked, and a small laugh escaped from the back of the room. Not at me, at him. The man who once made me feel small was now the joke of the office. And yet, I didn't laugh, because revenge isn't about shouting louder than the one who mocked you. It's about letting their own words echo back at them until they can't bear the sound. At home, it was worse for him. Our parents asked how the interview went, their faces bright with hope. He mumbled something vague, avoiding my eyes. They looked at me, curious, and I gave them a polite smile. I didn't expose him, not yet. I wanted him to sit with the silence, to taste the bitterness of his own pride falling apart. That night, I caught him sitting alone on the balcony, staring into the dark. His phone buzzed with messages from friends, maybe expecting him to brag again, but he didn't answer. For the first time, he had no story to tell. And here's the twist that made it sweeter. People started approaching me, colleagues, friends, even strangers online. I heard what happened, they said. You must feel amazing. But what I felt wasn't victory. It was balance, because this wasn't just about me winning. It was about showing him and everyone who ever thought like him that silence doesn't mean weakness. That being underestimated is not the same as being powerless. The revenge was never in my words. It was in the shift of power, in the look on his face when he realized he could no longer control the story, in the way people's respect for me grew, while their respect for him dissolved. Days turned into weeks, and the whispers didn't stop. If anything, they grew louder. Every time he tried to walk with confidence, people remembered. Every time he tried to speak with authority, someone smirked. And me, I stayed steady, calm, professional. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. The world was already proving it for me. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't fire or fury. It's silence. It's walking into a room and letting your presence speak louder than any insult. It's letting the truth play out in public while you stand tall, unbothered. My brother once told me I could never achieve anything because I was a girl. Now, without saying a single word, I had turned his insult into his prison. He had to live with it. Every day, every glance, every whisper. And I had to do nothing at all, because silence was the loudest revenge. That night, as I set my phone on the table, it wouldn't stop buzzing. Message after message popped up on the screen, all from him. My brother. The same brother who once laughed at my dreams, who mocked my silence, who told me I'd never do anything meaningful because I was a girl. Now, his words were different. I didn't know. One message read, "Why didn't you tell me?" Another followed. And then, "This isn't fair." I stared at the glowing screen, my lips curving into the faintest smile. Not fair. For years he had been the unfair one. He had thrown careless words like knives, cutting deep into my confidence. He had built himself up by pushing me down. And now, for the first time, life had delivered him the taste of his own medicine. But the most ironic part? He was asking me why I hadn't told him, as if I owed him my success, as if my achievements were his to approve. I ignored the texts. Instead, I poured myself a glass of champagne, something I had saved for a moment that truly mattered, and standing by my window, I watched the city lights stretch out before me, glowing like little sparks of possibility. The tall buildings stood like proof of ambition, of power, of dreams that people said were impossible, until they weren't. For the first time, I didn't feel like someone's younger sister. I didn't feel like just a girl. I felt like myself, seen, respected, unshakable, a leader, but the messages kept coming. At first they were desperate. "Please reply. You don't understand how this looks for me." Then they turned defensive. "You embarrassed me on purpose. You think you're better than me now?" Each ping of the phone was like a ghost of the past, reminding me of every dinner table where he had talked over me, every family gathering where he was praised while I was ignored, every time he said, "That's not your lane. Stay where you belong." And now he wanted sympathy. The more he texted, the more I realized something shocking. He wasn't just humiliated. He was scared. Scared of me. Scared of how the world now saw him. Scared that the one person he thought would always be beneath him had risen above. I didn't need to reply. Silence, again, was my sharpest weapon. The next morning, things twisted further. Our parents called me. Their voices were filled with confusion and disbelief. "Your brother said you're his boss?" My mother asked, almost whispering. I could imagine him, pacing in the living room, trying to twist the story, trying to make himself the victim. "Yes," I answered simply. The silence on the other end told me everything. Shock, pride, maybe even a little guilt, for never believing in me as much as they had believed in him. By evening, relatives were calling too. News spreads fast in families. Suddenly the same uncles and aunts who once said, "She's so quiet she won't get far," were now praising me. "We always knew you were special," they said. Lies, of course, but sweet lies that tasted like justice. My brother, though, couldn't escape. Every call, every conversation was another mirror showing him who he really was. And while mirrors can be cruel, at work, his life became harder. People didn't forget what happened in that interview room. His reputation was no longer the golden child, the confident young man. It was the guy who got outshined by his own sister. The whispers followed him everywhere, and he couldn't shake them off. One day, he passed by my office door. He paused, hand half raised as if to knock, then dropped it, and walked away. That small moment told me everything. He couldn't face me. Not at work, not at home, not even in silence. And me? I didn't celebrate loudly. I didn't post about it, didn't rub it in his face. My revenge wasn't a fire, it was a shadow that followed him everywhere, a quiet reminder that the world had shifted. Late that night, as I poured myself another glass of champagne, I thought back to his words in the kitchen months ago. "You'll never achieve anything big. You're a girl," I whispered to the city lights outside my window, almost laughing. And yet, here I am. For the first time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was free, because the sweetest revenge wasn't making him suffer. It was knowing that I no longer needed his approval, his validation, or his belief in me. I had already won. The next morning, the office felt different. My heels clicked against the polished floor, each step echoing through the lobby like a drumbeat of triumph. But it wasn't noise. It was music, a rhythm that told the world, "I belong here." I earned this. My team looked up as I entered. Smiles, nods. Good morning, boss. Their voices carried respect, not because of my title, but because of the journey that had brought me here. They didn't see me as someone's sister. They didn't see me as just a girl. They saw a leader. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him, my brother. The same brother who had once leaned back in his chair at home laughing at the thought of me doing anything meaningful. Now, he stood quietly in the corner of my office floor, his hands tucked into his pockets, his eyes fixed on the ground. He didn't greet me. He didn't smile. He couldn't. I didn't need to say anything. My silence was enough. As I passed him, I noticed something shocking, something I had never seen in him before. Not pride, not arrogance, not superiority. Shame. He looked smaller somehow, like the weight of his own words had finally collapsed on top of him. I smiled, but not out of cruelty. This wasn't about rubbing it in. This was about victory. The kind of victory that doesn't scream but whispers. The kind that doesn't need fireworks, because the quiet is louder. For a long time, I had carried his words like chains. You'll never do anything. You're a girl. And now, those chains were broken, lying in pieces on the floor while I walked past him free. I went to my office, the one with glass walls and a view of the city. Sitting at my desk, I let the sunlight pour over me. My hands brushed the smooth wood of the table, my nameplate shining back at me. Manager, leader, boss. Words that had once felt impossible were now mine. He lingered outside, pretending to check his phone, pretending to be busy. But I knew. He wasn't checking emails, he wasn't working. He was replaying that interview in his mind, the moment I walked in, the moment his jaw dropped, the moment his confidence cracked. And maybe he was also replaying every time he told me I wasn't enough. The truth was twisted, almost poetic. The person he had tried to keep small had outgrown him. The sister he had once mocked now had the power to decide his future at this very company. And the best part? I didn't even need to use that power. Just the knowledge of it, the reality of it, was enough to undo him. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes for a moment, and whispered softly to myself. You said I couldn't do anything. Now look who's in charge. For the first time in years, those words felt true. Not like a shield, not like a comeback, but like a fact, written in stone. But there was something even deeper here. This wasn't just revenge. Revenge is temporary. This was proof. Proof that I was capable. Proof that strength doesn't always roar. It can also build quietly in the shadows, until it shines so brightly that no one can ignore it. And proof that his words had never defined me. They had only fueled me. The twisted beauty of it all was that he had become a part of my success story, without even knowing it. Every insult had been a spark. Every mockery had been a lesson. Every dismissal had been another reason for me to keep going. Now, when people in the office whispered, they weren't laughing at me. They weren't laughing with him either. They were telling the story of the sister who rose, and the brother who never saw it coming. It's strange how life works. Sometimes the people who try to bury you are the same ones who water your roots without realizing it. My brother tried to keep me in the shadows, and yet his shadow was the very thing that made me fight for the light. So as I watched him walk away that day, eyes still down, shoulders heavy, I felt no anger, no need to fight, no need to prove, because the proof was already there. The office that once would have ignored me now stood still when I entered. The title on my desk was mine. The respect in their voices was mine. The freedom in my heart was mine. And him? He was just a reminder of a chapter I had closed. I sipped my coffee slowly, looking out at the city I had once only dreamed of conquering. The streets below buzzed with life, and the sunlight painted everything gold. For the first time in my life, I felt not just seen, but unshakable. And that whisper stayed with me, soft but powerful, echoing in every corner of that glass office. You said I couldn't do anything. Now look who's in charge.